You've got questions, I've got answers. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Caleb Dennison, and I am excited to bring you this first installment of a new weekly series we're calling You Asked, because many of you have asked a lot of questions. And while I do my best to reply to you in the YouTube comment section, Instagram DMs, Twitter or X or whatever it's called, DMs, even via email, there is just not enough time in the day, week, month, year, decade, or what's left of my lifetime to get to all of them. However, some of your questions are really good and pretty commonly asked as well. So I figured answering these questions for you in a video like this might end up helping a lot of folks. Plus, it just sounds fun. So keep an eye out on Digital Trends socials for posts we put out asking for your questions, and hit me up. If your question doesn't get answered this week, maybe I'll get to it next week. And regardless, feel free to keep posting your question, because the more I see it, the more likely I am to get to it. You all came through with over 120 questions the first time we asked. I love it, so keep them coming. I hope you guys like this idea. Let me know if you do down in the comments, and please feel free to share this with anyone you know who could maybe use some tech help. Okay, with that in mind, let's get into it. Question 1 comes from Edward Lacombe, also known as eLacombe75, and they said, "Hey Caleb, I'm pretty sensitive to motion artifacts on TVs and have always been driven to Sonys in the past for this reason. However, these days I almost always stream in HD from Hulu, Live TV, or Disney Plus, NF, Amazon, etc. No cable and no YouTube at all. My question is video processing essentially a non-issue in this case? For purely HD streaming content, will the QM8, for example, be just as good as a Sony? Thanks." Well, the short answer, Edward, is no. The QM8 will not be just as good as a Sony in that example. You mentioned that you almost always stream in HD, and I imagine you're streaming in 4K from some places like Disney Plus and getting HDR2. But the higher resolution of those streams is only one element of picture quality for a TV's processor to deal with. The issue with all streaming services, not just YouTube, is that the signal is compressed, and so there will be missing information. Now, this becomes most evident with large swaths of color on the screen. You'll notice color banding when going from, say, a darker shade of green to a lighter one. The better the processing, the less color banding you'll get. Also, how a TV decides to handle brightness, how clean the image looks in general. There are a ton of other things the processor does to make even what seems like a high quality source look its best. I suppose if all you ever watched was 4K Blu-rays, the processing between the two TVs would still make a difference, it just wouldn't be as apparent. But when it comes to streaming, take all the help you can get. Question 2 comes from Shukla91. Apologize if I pronounced that incorrectly. They write, "Hey Caleb, I was wondering if it's better to plug my HDMI devices directly into my TV or my receiver if I'm using an eARC connection, and what are the pros cons of doing either one? Does it make a difference for gamers? Thanks." That is legitimately a great question. I get asked this one a lot, so thanks for asking it. So purely for the sake of convenience, I'll usually recommend folks connect everything to their TV and then run an ARC or eARC signal back to their receiver or soundbar. This way, you're definitely going to get the least amount of lag for game consoles, even if it is just a minimal improvement. And you just have the straightforwardness of everything that's on the TV screen having audio come out of your audio device, whether it's built-in streaming services or some other device that you've connected. There are some exceptions though. If your TV and receiver don't both support eARC, then it may not support the best available audio signals. For instance, Dolby Atmos would be delivered via compressed and slightly lossy Dolby Digital Plus instead of lossless Dolby True HD. And I do think you can hear the difference. Also, if you have more devices than you have HDMI inputs, it may make more sense to use your AV receiver or preamp processor as the hub. Also, there's this issue where sometimes ARC just won't work. I made a whole video about that right there. With that said, only recently have AV receivers started supporting HDMI 2.1 features, and they have been buggy as they've been rolled out. That's another reason I generally suggest using your TV's inputs and outputting eARC to your audio device if you're using next-gen consoles, for example. I hope that helps. Question 3 comes from Air Payton. Hi Caleb, love your content. Why, thank you very much. Flattery will get you everywhere, but I'm answering this question because it's a good one, just for the record. Okay, Air Payton says, if you were moving to a new place where you need a nice TV for the living room with plenty of windows and light, would you go for an expensive brand TV or something along the lines of Hisense's high-end TVs? What panel type, brightness, HDR tech, and HDMI tech would you prefer for said TV? Thank you. So I think I understand what you mean when you mention an expensive brand TV versus something like the higher end Hisense, and we can toss TCL and Vizio in there too. You're contrasting those brands against a more expensive, say Sony, LG, or Samsung, I reckon. And then the other component of your question is around dealing with a living room with plenty of windows and light coming in. So I'll address the second part first by saying that I feel like there's this misnomer floating around that super bright TVs will prevent you from getting a washed out picture and reflections caused by lots of bright light coming into a room. Ultra bright TVs will produce a better looking picture in bright rooms than non-ultra bright TVs, but the picture will always be a little washed out, and reflections will always be there no matter how good the anti-glare treatment might be. They're just mitigated a little bit better with some TVs versus others. With that said, I think that if there is an advantage to going with one of the more expensive brands when battling a bright room specifically, it's that those expensive brands tend to have the best anti-glare technology. Samsung and Sony in particular have models that cut glare pretty well. But when it comes to raw brightness power, frankly, I'll put a Hisense TCL or one of Vizio's top models against Samsung and Sony any day. The real difference in pricing comes in other picture performance areas as well as quality control in general. And I try to cover that stuff in the TV reviews. As for the other questions at the end there, panel type, like go with the one with the best anti-glare. It doesn't matter whether it's VA or IPS, but it's probably gonna be VA with anti-glare. And then HDR type, like most of the TVs have all the HDR, so that's not really a question. You'll get it all anyway, so there you go. Next question comes from Devin Wagoner 702, who writes, hi Caleb, could you address the reliability of the various TV brands? I recently saw a podcast that said LG TVs are the brand that are most commonly returned at Best Buy. Well, first let me say that it's hard for me to report on reliability as a reviewer because I so rarely get to test TVs for many months, let alone many years. I do keep in touch with friends and family to see how their TV brands and models are doing year after year, but that's a small sample size. So any conclusions I draw would be too anecdotal. I do understand that reliability is important, and I feel like the best indicator for whether there is a widespread problem with a specific brand or a specific model is gonna be in discussion forums, which are a pain to comb through. But search engines can usually find you the info you're looking for if you search the right way. Like, is the brand X Model Y TV reliable? You're likely to find out if there's a whole group talking about how tons of them failed, right? Or more than likely, you're not gonna find that. But the most important commentary I can make as a result of your question is to be wary of statements like LG's TVs are the brand that is most commonly returned at Best Buy. First off, find out where that data came from and who is reporting it. If some dude says, yeah, I heard that blah, 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 or this guy I know that works at Best Buy said, blah, blah, blah. Like immediately be skeptical. To poke holes in the statement, I'd want to know which were the top 3 models of LG TVs that were getting returned. I bet it wasn't their OLEDs. And were those 3 models low-cost budget TVs, or were they maybe the higher-end QNED TVs? And why were they returned? Was it because they broke within the return window, or did maybe folks decide they didn't like WebOS or couldn't figure out how to turn off the motion smoothing? You see what I'm saying? Like, that is a very big blanket statement with no details that I just have to completely toss that out the window. So I can't address the reliability of the TV brands unless I have firsthand experience with multiple failures of retail TVs, and even that would be isolated info. I think the court of public opinion will be the best judge on reliability. You need a large sample size to get meaningful data, and I just can't do that. Next one up, Zach Stoiber 1496 writes, I want to see the Dolby Vision versus HDR10 comparison between competitor TVs like the S95C versus G3 or A95L once it's released. Well, Zach, that is not a question, but I'm sure glad you posted that comment because I think a lot of folks feel the same way, and that includes me. I plan to do Dolby Vision in the Sony A95L versus HDR10 Plus in the Samsung S95C using the same panel technology and balancing out as many other performance factors as possible. I think that's the best way to do it. And you know what? I think we're not gonna see a ton of differences. And that the conversation is gonna end up being about how the folks doing the HDR mastering of movies and TV shows are not taking enough advantage of Dolby Vision's capabilities. And that's the reason we're not seeing much difference. But I'm ready to be surprised and we'll definitely go in with an open mind. So that is coming, but first I have to get a Sony A95L and I'm waiting just like everyone else. Also growing impatient, but I digress. Okay, so this next one is just a fun one personally. Chris B. Worth writes, so I use Aperion powered Bluetooth speakers as my TV speakers. Anyway, I recently learned you used to work with them. Super curious to know how you learned that. Not that it's a secret. Anyway, Chris continues, do you avoid reviewing their products because they don't often put out anything new? Or do you view reviewing them as a conflict of interest? Ha ha ha. Or would it be awkward because you know you like other speakers better? Yeah, so I did used to work at Aperion Audio and that was a great time. I learned a lot there about audio on both the electronics and the speaker side. I have reviewed Aperion products on this channel and will continue to do so as I can. But I do have to say that boutique speaker brands like Aperion are super fun and I like to do them from time to time. Same with like SVS, for example. But I am so busy with TVs that I have to pick my battles with speakers. And that's why you'll see me reviewing more commercial brands with bigger footprints like Sonos or Klipsch, KEF, B&W, Polk, Definitive Technology, etc. And yeah, at first I did feel like there may have been a conflict of interest there, but honestly, I got over that pretty quickly, and especially now. I mean, I left Aperion in 2008, so I feel like 15 years of distance is, yeah, there's not a conflict there anymore. 2443 Bobby writes, my receiver is about 7 years old. Would upgrading to a current model have any impact on picture quality when using pass-through? Okay, so this question is a little tricky. I'm gonna do the best I can here though. The term pass-through means the signal simply passes through, unaltered from the source. So if you're actually using pass-through, then there should be no difference whatsoever from one receiver to another. However, when it comes to certain combinations of resolution, HDR type, and most importantly, chroma subsampling, which at its most basic is color information, most 4K HDR signals can be passed through HDMI 2.0 and earlier, which would include your receiver. And that maxes out at 18 gigabits per second. But there are a few setups where you might actually need the higher bandwidth of HDMI 2.1. If you wanted 4K Dolby Vision with 10-bit or 12-bit color, I believe you would need HDMI 2.1 in your receiver to pass that kind of signal along. But here's the more important thing I want you and everyone else watching to take away. There are very rare exceptions to that rule. And if you know better, then you know enough not to need the answer to this question at all. But yeah, your AV receiver doesn't need to be doing anything with the video signal. It should just pass it along. In fact, all of you watching out there, I think it's worth going into your AV receiver and turning video processing off if it is turned on. The TV's video processor is better than what's in your receiver by like a lot. Okay, that's episode 1 in the can. Thanks so much. I hope you guys learned something. I hope you were entertained. If you have suggestions on how we can make this better, please drop me a comment down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you on the next one. And until then, here's 2 other videos I think you might like.